Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Science Chick Report. I'm here tonight with Dr. Hazel Keedle, joining us from Sydney, Australia. So it's night here, it's morning where she is. And Dr. Keedle is a midwife that I met actually down at a conference in Australia right before COVID closed down the whole world. So it was really one of the last big international conferences I was at before that gigantic pandemic that we all experienced. But Hazel, I met her when she was in the process of finishing her PhD, which she has now completed. She completed in 2021 from Western Sydney University. She has more than 25 years of experience as a midwife, and she's written a couple of fantastic books. Her first one is a fantastic seller. It's called Birth After Cesarean: Your Journey to a Better Birth. And so this one is terrific. This is actually really directed more toward mothers who are interested in looking at their options after they've had one cesarean and then they're thinking about having another baby. Okay. And her newest one, and this is actually still in the proof copy here, so you can see this is hot off the press. This is the Clinicians Guide to a Better Birth After Cesarean. And so this is actually, again, a fantastic book. You know, I've read both of them, and I just thought there was so much information in there, just a lot of practical information and so many tips, but also so many stories, reflections, and, you know, melded in with a lot of the research literature on this. And so I think that's why so many people have been interested in this book and buying this book, is because they, and it's just really going to find a wealth of information there. So, hello, Hazel. It's good to see you again.
Hello, thanks for having me here today.
And welcome to my podcast. So can you just start by kind of giving us a little bit of a background of how you started kind of being interested in studying VBAC and how you became interested in the whole topic of, you know, birth after cesarean and kind of what are women's options for that?
Sure. So when I trained as a midwife, so I'm a nurse and midwife. I did my nursing first and then became a midwife. Mm-hmm. And I don't really remember very much on birth after cesarean in my training. So I didn't feel like it was an area I knew a lot about. And then I got married and had two babies in very quick succession, only 1 year apart from them. And the first one was a planned home birth, but ended up being a cesarean in hospital. And that really, I didn't have a great time with that cesarean, or even in the lead up. I got pneumonia, then the cesarean, and then endometritis. So I had a really rough time of it, and I wasn't in a good headspace. But then I got pregnant very quickly, which wasn't kind of the plan, but these things happen. And it was only 4 months. I worked it out once I realized I was pregnant, which took a few more months, but I worked out that it was only 4 months from the cesarean to conception, which made a very short interpregnancy interval. So then I dived into the reading what was around at the time, and then still deciding I wanted to have a VBAC even with that, with the short pregnancy interval. And I had to fight the whole time through pregnancy, and especially through labor and birth. And I came out with two questions, and this is what started my research trajectory, I think, in this area. These two questions, when I did push my baby out, was I felt amazing. Like I felt like I had just, I don't know, I'd won Olympic gold. Like I had been through such a fight and yet done it. And I wondered if other women felt like that. Was it just me because I'm a bit of a birth nerd and midwife, came from a lineage of midwives? Is that just because it's me? Or do other women feel as amazing after having a vaginal birth after cesarean? But the other question I had was, that was a real big fight. And I'm a midwife. And if I had to fight that hard, how does any other woman in Australia, let alone, the rest of the world, how do they manage to do that when I had to fight and I had answers to fight back with? And,
right.
there's a lot to my birthing story that is in the first book. I share it all. And it was such a challenge. And I thought, are other women experiencing this? And they're the two questions that pushed me onto a research career, and then meeting an amazing mentor and friend now, but at the time was this big idol, which was Professor Hannah Darling. And I met her at an event. She's a very well-known midwifery researcher in Australia and internationally. And we were at an event where I'd shared my story about my VBAC story, and she pulled me aside afterwards and said, because this was a community event, she goes, "Oh, you're a midwife. Like, I really think you should you should research this. And then got in contact with me and sent me emails for about a year because my babies were very small at that point. And then after a year, I was like, yeah, okay, I'll give this a go.
Well, that actually kind of like brings up like the next question I wanted to ask you, which is this. It's about your cover images. So you have the first one here, you have the mom by herself with their fist up like that. And I thought that was just such a great image. And then you have here with, the, kind of zooming back and you see the clinicians and the family and support all around her. I probably didn't notice it necessarily in the first book, but I did definitely get it in the second book when you told the story about the mother who this seems like this was an illustration of, that she was so excited when she had her birth and what she did. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the image, first of all, came when I was looking at what would be on the front of this first book. So I'd already approached you and your publishing house and got the contract, and I'm like, okay, what do I want this to look at? And I started looking at images on Instagram actually, and looking up the VBAC image. And like hashtag VBAC, what happens? And there are all these images with the women with a fist in the air. And I remember doing something similar myself. And I'm like, wow, that's actually a real theme going on here. Like, this is what women are doing. And that makes sense to me because I felt like that because of such a big fight to have my VBAC. So I felt like it was a bit of a secret language that was going on in the VBAC world. But I wanted this book to be for women planning any birth after cesarean. But the fist up is a bit of a nod to the triumph of a VBAC. And then since the book has come out, it's now being replicated. So it's made it an even bigger momentum on social media because of the book. So now I get images of women with the fist up and holding the book, which I just love. Because
I love that too. That is so awesome. Well, yeah, there was that one story in there where the mom was like, she again had to fight really hard. And then she was like, swearing epithets.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Okay, so that was one of the stories shared by Vicky Hobbs, who's a doula, and she. So with both the books, I've always invited collaborators to come and share their story as well, because it shouldn't just be my story, and it's not. But it's definitely a global story. So I reached out for the second one. So the first one's all about women and their women's stories, and the second one I reached out to clinicians and said, would you like to put something in? For some, they just answered some questions for me, so you have that kind of format. But others wrote it very freestyle, and one of those was Vicky Hobbs, who's a beautiful doula and doula trainer out in Perth in Western Australia, which is a long way from Sydney.
Right.
And I go over there. Every few years, and she brings me over actually to do workshops with her. So I know Vicky really well. She's a lovely, lovely soul. And she did write some stuff for me. And then she wrote about two different women, and they're very different stories with a similar theme of birth after cesarean. And that one that she writes where, this woman just like, she fought as well, and she changed her healthcare provider like last minute, and she felt so much triumph from her VBAC, and there were quite a few expletives in there.
Yeah. I thought, that's where that came from. But yeah, no, that was great. And I think it is, like you said, a very kind of common reaction, because if you feel like I did it, and even if you end up having another cesarean, but you feel like you're in control, I think a lot of times people feel this sense of triumph and peace about the experience. They feel it really, they feel okay about it. And, it's like it may not have been exactly where they planned to go, but they still felt like that they got their voice heard and their wishes respected. And so I think that that's actually a really important thing. Yeah. Can you, I said, you talk about VBAC quite a bit. Could you tell us a little bit about kind of what is a VBAC, just in case somebody's kind of tuning in and they've never heard that term before? What is it, and why might women want to have one of those?
Yeah, sure. So with the rising cesarean rates that we have across the globe, we're seeing more and more women have a cesarean, and they often have that cesarean in their first birth as well. And certainly with something that we call the cascade of intervention. So when you start one intervention, another one is more likely, and we've got such high rates of induction of labour. So we do see, as an end point, an end result, more and more women who've had a cesarean birth. And so women often don't have just one baby. Sometimes they do, but often they have more than one baby. And so the vaginal birth after cesarean is women in their next pregnancy after cesarean who want to have a vaginal birth and then have a vaginal birth. And that's called a vaginal birth after cesarean. And it is seen as separate from having a vaginal birth and then another vaginal birth because of the influence of the scar. So obviously with a cesarean, there's a cut to the uterus, and usually these days it's a very low but underneath the bikini line cut, and it's transverse, and it heals really well because there's great blood vessels in that area.
Right.
So women have that lower cut, and obviously it cuts then all the way through to the skin layer as well. So lots of different muscle layers and then the skin layer. So on the outside you can see the scar. And the scar on the uterus, which is where the baby is growing in the next pregnancy, has a very small chance of opening, especially during labor where there's the contractions and, the uterus is stretched as big as it's going to be. And then it has these contractions that are happening as well across the different muscles. So in that case, there's a very small chance that it could open up along that scar, which has now come up a little bit because the baby is nice and firm, and that is called a uterine rupture. Right. And it can be partial, so it can be like a bit of a rupture and not so significant, or it can be a complete uterine rupture where there's a big tear in the uterus. And when that happens, that can be, in very small cases, it can be catastrophic, or it's a horrible term that, but it can have a significant impact to the life of the woman and the baby. And then, therefore, lots of women who are planning birth after cesarean, there is this big risk talk around about the risk of uterine rupture. However, there are also many risks involved with having a repeat cesarean too.
Right. I mean, you're kind of limited about how many of those you really should have, over a life. And there's always lots of scarring and stuff. So, I mean, there are plenty of risk for doing it both ways, not to mention just the risk of having major surgery anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And women, in the work that I've done in my PhD in sense, what I have found out from the woman's experience is that women actually want to have, or at least plan, a vaginal birth. It is something like, I asked a question, and I put I've never published it except for putting it in the new book coming out, was in this national survey that I did as part of my PhD for women who'd had a previous cesarean, asked them, like, why would you have that type of birth? Like, why would you plan a vaginal birth after cesarean? And then we got all their comments, and I did an analysis of those comments. And the biggest reason was to experience birth.
Oh.
Like, it's to go through that experience and have that experience. And then other things that we would probably think, maybe as clinicians would think, well, these would be the reasons, such as quicker healing, being able to pick up your children, being able to drive your car, all those kind of things were also there as well. But by far the most common reason was because they just wanted to experience birth.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're probably feeling like also too that their wishes weren't really necessarily always heard or respected. That's a huge issue.
Absolutely. Like we also saw that, if we think about birth trauma being something that is a psychological response, then when we have a lot of studies that say it's around about a third of women may experience a traumatic birthing experience in the community. But when we asked women with this previous cesarean and planning a VBAC in this survey, we found that it was high as 2/3 of women.
I can believe that.
Yeah. So we've got more women also with this experience of birth trauma, and potentially then wanting to, but still having that desire to want to have a vaginal birth. So they're often in a bit of a quandary on what decision to make.
Well, that actually does kind of bring up one of the next questions I wanted to ask you, which is, you do talk about the importance of birth trauma and kind of like how that's a lot of times an issue in the decision-making around a subsequent birth, and so can you talk a little bit about kind of like what are the factors that contribute to it?